All right, I think. Okay, I was on twice. Okay, so I think I am on. We are set. Sorry for that delay. We had some technical difficulties, but it is nice to see you all this still morning, still morning. It's been an eventful morning. Appreciate you all being on and wanted to make sure that we maximized as much discussion time as possible. Want to just dive in unless there are some initial questions. So if there are any initial questions, I'm happy to talk about those now, but otherwise I'm going to go through sections of that PowerPoint we sent over in advance, but want to maximize the discussion and feedback that you all might have as we walk through that. So any initial kind of questions that folks have? Okay. Great. And just to make sure, because I see we have some phone folks on, so maybe just really quick, I see Leader Johnson, Chairman Watson, Chairman White. I believe, let me see, we have Speaker Pro Tem Hale, and then we've got a couple folks on the phone. So if you're on the phone, would you mind just shouting out who you are so we all know who's on the call?
Commissioner, this is Chelsea Crawford, your Chief of Staff. So I'm here listening in. I'll go
Perfect.
first.
This is Kirk Haston. I'm trying to get my app to work, so I might jump off for a second off the phone, but this is my number right now.
Perfect. All right, great. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then we will get going. As soon as I do that. All right. So the idea today is to make sure that we are talking about all the feedback that we have received to date from the various opportunities we've had to engage. And so this is, I'm not going to read this statement, you've all seen it, but I do want to be really clear that before every single engagement that we've had as a department, and anything that is department sponsored or facilitated, we do read this statement. We built this with the Attorney General's office to make sure that we have created all of the necessary boundaries related to any existing litigation, as well as to set expectations about process. So we are grateful. They've been really good partners every step of the way in this conversation, but this is something that we agreed needed to be part of any engagement. Today we're going to talk, I just want to make sure you all have a chance to ask any questions about the process that we've been engaging in. I'm going to share what the public comment to date has been and ask for some feedback or direction, and then talk a little bit about direction that we are looking at for the local contribution part of the conversation. In terms of process, as you all know, we've had a lot of engagement so far, but essentially what we are asking is that anything that any public member of the public has, they submit that in writing. The exception to that are town halls or Twitter town halls where we are recording those. We then make sure that those are publicly posted. All subcommittee meetings are publicly posted in terms of recording, and then we're doing screenshots of anything on the Twitter town hall. If it is not part of one of those events, then we are asking that people submit the comments in writing to our website or to our email address. That way it's there for the record. But want to give you a sense of all of the information that's come in. And so we certainly have a lot of materials and we've hosted a lot of events. All of that is on our website. Public comment and feedback. We've received hundreds of emails. To be very transparent, all of those are posted on our website. They are also all given to every subcommittee so that we were going to tag it to specific subcommittees. We've decided instead that every subcommittee should get all of the public comment, and then we essentially tag it so subcommittees who want to just focus on things that might be more relevant for their topic area can limit what they read, but they have access to everything. This week we launched school funding ambassadors. So we had a lot of folks who wanted to serve on subcommittees, and we had 250 spots, but we couldn't get to all 1,000 people who wanted to participate on a subcommittee. So those folks are now school funding ambassadors. Their responsibility is to get feedback in their zip code or broader community. We have a form they fill out with all of that feedback. They send that back to the department, and then we give that to the subcommittees. We just yesterday got the Vanderbilt poll. So the Vanderbilt poll that happens every year, they agreed to add questions on school funding. We did not know what those questions were ahead of time. It was a completely third-party conducted poll using their researchers and statisticians. That data was done over the last 4 weeks as part of their broader poll. We just got the information back. It will be released to the public tomorrow. So it is under embargo, but do want to just say thematically what we are seeing is, frankly, and very, I think in a good way, I'm very excited, very consistent with what we have heard from town halls and certainly what we have received in public feedback. Broad support for funding formula work, really focusing on those students who need the most support, and that is across urban, suburban, rural, Republican, Democrat, and Independent. There's some variance, but we will send you, as part of the takeaway from this meeting, we will send you an embargoed copy of those results. Please just know that it's not public until tomorrow at noon. And then the last thing is that we've gotten a lot of requests for national experts or experts. We did do a procurement with that. So that way it was someone who had to show their qualifications. Those experts will be available to all subcommittees for meeting 4 shortly after the new year to answer questions and help more direct where they can find resources. The expert is not to help create or push decisions. It is to make sure that people have accurate information and can make sure that they've mastered whatever it is they're discussing. All of that goes to subcommittees. We are then taking those 18 subcommittee recommendations and providing those to you all, and you all can give feedback and direction about where you'd like the department to go. So that's a little bit of the process structure so far. As I said, everything is online. I think people didn't expect it to be this transparent, but we do believe that with a process as important as this one, we want to make sure everything is posted online and people have access to it. That has been a commitment that we've made, and we certainly will continue to do in batches every 3 to 4 weeks. We're trying to do it at a monthly cadence. And so everything to date as of last week is now on our website. This is just a little bit about the engagement, 18 public subcommittees. We've got 8 regional town halls. Those were fantastic. Twitter town halls. We are currently this week and next week doing local funding town halls. Those are with county commissioners, county mayors, superintendents, school finance chairs, and school board chairs. They are coming together with the opportunity to give feedback from their perspective and also help us get to a better space in terms of the direction for the local contribution part of the formula. So they're giving some feedback on that. We have the newsletter and then, of course, the email. We also have toolkits. So if you, and we would strongly encourage, if you can, local toolkits for communities to use. Those are plug and play opportunities to say, if you want to have a town hall or a public meeting to get feedback from your constituents or communities, we have toolkits available to be able to move forward and do that. We've got lots of folks who are doing that. I talked about the school funding ambassadors and the Vanderbilt poll, and as well as the experts. So those are some of the things we are supporting, but we are not personally leading. And then lots of engagement. I won't read through all of these, but we are meeting regularly between a cabinet member and myself with regional groups of superintendents in both. We met with them in November. We're doing the same in December, and we'll do it again in January. And then my cabinet's been meeting with individual rural districts. So we are meeting with 54 districts that are very rural, and maybe it was too far of a drive to come to the town hall. So cabinet members are going to the district and asking for feedback on site to make sure everybody feels included. What I don't have up here, but that is part of the litigation negotiations to have that delay for a year, is that I am meeting with counsel from Shelby County, from Metro Nashville, and from the small schools, small and now medium-sized school districts, those 80 school districts that are part of the lawsuit. They are also giving multiple rounds of feedback directly to me. I, myself, Christy Ballard, Attorney General's office, and their legal counsel are all documenting that for the record as well. So that's a whole other set of feedback that's contributing to this. So want to be able to pause there and see if you all have any questions about the feedback process. I'm happy to kind of walk through what other states have done, how this is similar or different. But if you want to see more feedback, I can maybe fit it in the middle of the night, but certainly want to see if there are things, recommendations, guidance, or expectations that you have around additional or different types of feedback that you'd like the department to ensure that we are either leading, engaging, or facilitating.
Commissioner, this is Senator Watson.
Yes, sir.
So I am in the process now of planning a series of town hall meetings across my district. And where do I find the toolkit that you discussed? Is that on the Department of Education's website, or is that something you will link us to?
It is both. So it is on our website now, but we will put that as one of the takeaways and make sure all of you have, we'll send you the direct link of that package. Thank you very much for doing those. That's exciting. Other feedback or direction that you'd like to see from the department, or ways that we can make sure that we are engaging your communities and expectations that you might have for us. Taking those notes.
Commissioner, this is Bo again. Maybe I'll get Farrell fired up here and he'll pop in here. So will you provide to us who are the experts that we might be speaking with? Because, for example, this past week I spent 3 days with the Hunt Keen group, and they one of the people I interacted with up there was from the Edunomics program at Georgetown University. I have a call with them on Friday to talk about some of this stuff because they're very interested. Maybe they're one of the groups that you're talking to. But I think it might be helpful for the members if they had some of those resource people that do this kind of work at their fingertips, that they could get sort of an independent perspective from some of those folks that are watching what we're doing.
Yes, sir. So that is a great question, and I'm happy to answer that. So we have 3 different procurements that we ran. These are small dollar procurements. And so the first is around professional development for districts, making sure that they understand the difference between a resource-based formula and a student-based formula, how that might impact them, some things they should be thinking about. We have a second group of experts to what you just said that is really focused on the General Assembly. So being available, they're going to have a couple of sessions that are virtual, and they are also happy to come here, but it is to answer a lot of the questions you have, be available to engage, and then also say, hey, look, this is what this would mean. And then that would be separate from the department. That is a relationship that would be between General Assembly members, of course, your staff, and then the expert. I would say, and I'm not sure if the procurements are executed or not yet. I do know that the particular providers have been selected, but that is one where you would have the opportunity to engage with Edunomics. They are one. We've also had a lot of interest and feedback from Bellwether, who collects partners from around the country and will then have those experts as part of kind of a catalog of options, specifically for subcommittee members. Of course, you are all part of that. So you'll have both of those at your disposal for questions. And again, that would be separate from the department. We're procuring with them to be able to ensure that you all have access, but we aren't directing what those answers will be. The last part of that is we have a national expert group that is not part of the procurement process. So they aren't as quote unquote on demand. We aren't, supporting them to be able to engage. But those are folks like SREB will be on that. If you think about, CCSSO, which has the look at all of the states, Education Commission for the states, Excel and Ed will be sitting on that. The Bush Institute will be on that. And then a couple of others that are more focused on student success, academics, and the connection. Edunomics is also one of those who will be participating there. So lots of folks who will help to make sure that we are providing accurate information and that they can answer questions that subcommittees have, and also advise you all specifically on policy. That national expert group is somewhat of a subcommittee, but they are there. If you all have specific questions, it would go to that group and they'll be able to kind of have a problem of practice they will discuss and provide you directly with that feedback.
Okay, Bo brought me into the conversation. So is that information on the website now? Will you provide that to us? Where do we access that information and contact with them?
Yep. So we are finalizing the procurement component of that. So as soon as we finalize those, then we will send you the contact information for the people that you can be in touch with. And then the national experts, we will send you, we're finalizing that doodle poll. We will send you the dates and times where we are all getting together. But then we will send you the list of here are all of the people who are on that national expert subcommittee with their contact information so that you will be able to contact them directly. But we're finalizing the doodle poll times and who wants to commit to different parts of that conversation. So that's the third takeaway I have after the Vanderbilt poll and the toolkits. We will send you that as a takeaway from this meeting.
Thank you.
Of course.
Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
this is Mark. Forgive me for asking this because I should already know it, but what is the role of the steering committee as we go through the process? What exactly are you expecting from us? I haven't had a chance to catch up on yet.
So the great question. So I think the expectations and hopes that I have of this group is that, this is a really big policy proposal that may be coming the way of the General Assembly in a month or two. So I want to be able to say, look, in these iterations of what we're hearing from the public feedback, that we are collecting that public feedback, we're synthesizing that for you based on the subcommittee recommendations. That's what we're going to go through after this part of the conversation, and that you all give us some direction on, yep, this does look like you're moving in the right direction, or we really would like to see these things, or we really hope you're considering that. So before any policy proposal is put forward in more of this kind of statutory type language, that we are getting direction from you all as leaders in education and finance for the state. We don't want to go too far without getting more of that. And I certainly don't want it to be something that is just one branch of government giving it over to the other, that you all ultimately consider and either pass or don't pass legislation. So I want to make sure if we are giving you something, that it's something that you were able to kind of have a big part in and help us build together. So it is a lot of direction setting for me specifically on what you want us to do or to stop doing.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. I'm going to go through the feedback that we've heard so far. And then feel free to jump in or stop me at any point. Otherwise, we'll stop at the end and any kind of questions or feedback direction that you have. Charlie's here taking lots of notes for me, which I appreciate. So one of the things, just to root everyone, the states that are shaded in green are the states that have moved from a resource-based formula, which is what Tennessee has, and have now adopted a student-based formula. So you can see it's 39 states and territories. 33 of those are full student-based. 5 of them are what we call hybrid, meaning they have a student-based formula, but they still have some direct resources they fund on top of that. There are no states that have moved from a student-based back to resource. Everyone, it's a little bit, and many of you can remember when everyone was categorical, which the federal government will not give up. So federal government does categorical like a Title I program or Title II, which means they give you money and they expect you to spend the money exactly the way they tell you to. It is more of a spending plan. You can only spend Title I dollars on low-income students, for example. Most states then move to resource, which is what we have. And that says you identify the things or the buckets or categories of things that you want folks to spend money on. You figure out how much money you think they will need for that resource, and you fund the resource. And most of the BEP is that. It is saying, for example, students with disabilities, the most intensive category, we say, great, every teacher has an 8.5 student ratio. So that means one teacher has a caseload of 8.5 students, and you fund that. That is a resource. You are funding the resource. Now there's flexibility in how districts spend that money, but it is very tied to resource categories. Another example is when you talk about funding the instructional component of the BEP and the dollar amount for teacher increases, it goes to that specific need, and districts have flexibility to spend within that bucket, but they have a lot of flexibility in terms of that specific resource item. A student-based formula is actually saying, what is the need of the student? Let's fund the needs of the student. Districts have complete flexibility unless you all put stipulations on the funding, but it does mean that you are funding the actual needs of the student, not of the system, which is what a resource-based system does. There are only 10 states left that are resource-based. Kansas has been in litigation for, I think, 20 years on this. And it's because they just go round and round with the courts. And then a lot of states are moving in this direction. North Carolina is expected to take up some legislation soon. I think obviously we are talking about it. Wyoming and South Dakota are also considering it. And I'm not quite sure what's happening in Delaware. There are only 2 states, Vermont and Wisconsin. Now, Vermont has moved from a guaranteed tax base and they are moving to student-based, is my understanding. Wisconsin has a very complicated formula. I talked to their chief and one of their legislators for a very long time about it. I couldn't even explain it if I wanted to, but it is certainly its own special formula. But that's all to say most states have moved in this direction, including most of our counterparts in the SEC. After moving past that, just some basic things BEP related. The process is different from the current BEP because, as you know, we've had years and years and years of this review committee. We had a number of commissions and folks who have come together and given recommendations. So we've had a lot of feedback and a lot of kind of that time to go over things over 10 plus years for a 30 plus year formula. What we are saying is that at some point we've got to actually act and not continue to have the conversation. And so this is something where we are getting a lot of feedback to consolidate for a policy proposal in this period of time, which is slightly different than how the BEP was originally constructed 30 plus years ago. I've talked a little bit about the difference. One of the things that we have heard, and you'll see this in the next slide, is who will lose money. I think any state that has made a shift has said no district will receive less from the state than they did before. That really is one of those kind of quintessential policy considerations. You don't want to have losers. You might just have different levels of winners, so to speak, from a funding perspective. But the biggest, I think, difference is that we're moving from 46 components of a BEP resource and we're moving to 4. And I'm going to kind of go through what those 4 are, but these are just some of the frequently asked questions we've been getting. In terms of the actual feedback, so the good stuff, you'll see this pyramid here these are the 4 potential components of a student-based formula. That base is a day in the life. So every student, no matter where you live, these are the things that the state helps to fund. The weight are the additional dollars that are assigned to students based on their specific needs. Typically, those are students with disabilities, low income, et cetera. You all do a lot of direct funding in the budget, which is fantastic. It's things like ACT retake, you fund summer programming. Those aren't weights, they're not proportional, but it is a dollar amount you assign to a child for a service. And then some states like Florida and Texas have leaned into outcomes. So making sure that it's not just money going out as an entitlement, but it's actually saying we as a state believe that we should be getting a return on that investment specific to student outcomes. And so wanting to make sure that districts who are doing really well for students who need that support are getting additional funds to expand successful programs. The requests we've received to date, and I put them as requests because no one can commit to anything. Everyone wants to make sure they don't lose money. That, again, no state has ever changed their formula really and had districts lose the state portion. I think they want to maintain flexibility because all districts need something a little bit different for their students. They want to make sure all the things that are currently funded outside of the BEP remain funded. So things like coordinated school health. I know that's really important to a lot of folks, and Representative Haston's been incredible on things like that. You think about VPK, which is going to be a big separate conversation, SROs, things like that. Typically, we fund outside of the BEP. This would allow all of that to be funded in one space inside of a new formula. And then everyone wants more time for local match so that there wouldn't be any, if there was a change in local contribution, we would not have any kind of addition in a short period of time, giving locals enough time to plan. The governor said publicly when we announced this community engagement process that he did not want to see taxes go up. And so that's why we think that we need to focus on a state formula and what a state contribution is, and then give more time to figure out what that then means for the local contribution and a 5-year timeline there. That's some of the things we've heard so far on the general formula. I'll pause and see if there are questions on any of this. And then just to preview, we are going to each of these. So like base would be next. But any questions on just the overall construct or feedback direction? Okay. So the base. So this is the feedback we've heard. I think there will be very little on this slide that will surprise any of you. It's things that I know you all have been hearing for a very long time. But coming off, there was a big push for these things. And to be very candid, it is remarkably consistent feedback. Whether it's rural, urban, suburban, East, Middle, West Tennessee, these are the things that we hear every single town hall, and by far the most feedback in writing to our email address. And it is the idea of funding nurses either at that national recommendation or one at every school, Those are different and they are different numbers, but that's one part. Would love feedback on which direction you'd like us to take there. Counselors, same thing, either at the national recommendation or one at every school. And right now, counselors in Tennessee can be academic advisors or more behavioral counselors. So there's some distinction there if you have thoughts there. School psychologists have come up a lot. That's been in and out of the BEP review committee recommendations, but doing that at the national recommendation. Teacher salaries and benefits is, as no surprise, the number one thing that we are hearing from a lot of folks. SREB, and we will send you that as one more takeaway, Charlie, if you can send this to them. They have a dashboard they just put out, and it has their the full salaries with all of our partner states, including the Virginias and Kentucky, but SEC plus them. And it talks about average salaries, but then it looks at insurance, benefits, and take home. It is a really good and I think objective, kind of nonpartisan way of saying this is what the information is. Here's what that might mean. We also have done a summary, and I'm happy to send that to you if anyone's interested, of looking at all of our border counties to see what teachers on the other side of the border are making, because that's really where a lot of competition is. So Lake County has a really significant competition with Kentucky, for example. Hamilton County, same thing. So I'm happy to provide that information, but we're hearing a lot about specifically benefits, retirement insurance. There is some interest in funding a principal at every school. Right now, the BEP does not do that. And so there is some interest in that. We have heard about APs, assistant principals as well, but that's been more mixed. And then people want to make sure there's still flexibility for deferred maintenance costs. So not new buildings, but let's make sure that pipes can get fixed and leaky roofs and all of that. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions. I think there's something in the chat. I'm going to try to pull that up as well. Oh, yes, sir. So compensation comparison. So we actually did that. We literally looked up every single border county in the state of Tennessee and then looked up the county on the other side of the border and pulled that district's salary schedule and put that into an Excel spreadsheet. So we did that. We have a lot of border counties, as I know you know, so we are happy to send that spreadsheet of what the differentials are. It's pretty interesting because sometimes we look really good and other places it's not so great. So we'll put that as a deliverable to send. Questions, feedback, direction, things that resonate more, don't resonate more. I want to make sure that we can also give that feedback back to the subcommittees for discussion.
Commissioner, you may get to this in a moment. What about, I'm hearing some about, district accountability, which is a bit of an issue in our current funding formula. Anything you want to say on that at this point, or is that later?
Excuse me, that'll be a little bit later. But what coffee went down the wrong pipe. What I will say is that that is something that from the department's perspective, I would say also from the administration's perspective, I've heard from many of you and a lot of advocates, partners, community members, parents, is that the accountability on the funding has got to be in place. Again, something that isn't really in place with the BEP, but what the requirement would be, and this is a federal requirement as much as it is, I think, frankly, best practice. Money now is generated at the student level, so which means that the school now knows how much their students have generated. That's not how it works with the BEP, right? Because it's your total students for the district, and you generate resources at the district level that then get allocated down to the school. This is saying we now know what this school funding has been created, and so that gets reported. This is how much money the school has generated from their students, and this is how they have spent their money on those students. That will then give you information about how many of those dollars have now gone to the district office versus stayed at the school site. All of that would be transparently reported. It's something we have to report and are starting to report this year by federal law, but it is something a lot of parents want to know. The second part of the accountability on that is going to be at the parent level. So just like a parent can pull up their TCAP results, a parent would now be able to say, this is how much money the state of Tennessee has invested in my child. They've given the district money for 4 dual credits. They've given the district money for innovative high school programs or for nursing at my child's school. And then the parent is able to advocate more for his or her child to say, look, I'm not getting these services or supports, and have better local conversations. So all of that is the accountability. What we will talk about is outcomes, which is more about the return on the investment of the dollars, not just the transparency. That's what we'll talk about a little later, but the public reporting part of that is pretty substantial. We cannot do that with the BEP. It's just not possible because of how the funding structure works.
Thank you.
Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
hey, I appreciate the work and you mentioning the take home pay and how the insurance and all the benefits play into it, because if there ever is an elephant that can hide inside of the room when all these discussions happen, it's that particular elephant, because that's the one that comes up a lot about how, as long as that we start keeping that in mind as we're factoring some of this in, because that's one of the number one things I hear brought up a lot to me in my district. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, sir. No. That's wonderful. The last thing I'll say on that, just a little bit to that point, is I know you all, and again, probably before I got here as well, push us in a really important way on when you put money into that instructional component of the BEP, making sure that actually gets to teachers in classrooms. With a student-based formula, you are able to do something similar. Texas is the latest state to do this, but it essentially says you put money into a student-based formula. There's a lot of flexibility, but you can say X% of those dollars must be spent on teacher salaries in classrooms. So you can put some stipulations that don't just put it into the instructional component of a BEP, but can actually direct that has to go to teacher increases for existing teachers and not to fund new positions. That's flexibility that you all have in this type of a formula that you don't necessarily have right now. So just wanted to put that as another bullet. I know that comes up quite often in our conversations. Weights is the next component. This has been just really interesting to see the feedback we've received. So the weight is saying after the base, so let's just say 5,000 because it's an easy number to reference. A weight would be the percent generated from that student for any of these categories. So for example, if you have an economically disadvantaged student and you say, great, we're going to put a 10% weight on that, then that student has the $5,000, but then they also get $500 because of the needs of being a low-income child, or a child from a low-income community or family. So these are the weights we are hearing the most. Economically disadvantaged. Right now in the BEP, you have at risk. It's just $800 or $900 in the BEP. So that's something that currently exists. But what we're hearing a lot is concentrated poverty. There's a difference between, you've got 5% of your kids versus 95%. It's a multiplier effect. We're hearing a lot about that. A lot about funding special students with special needs or with disabilities at the cost, or at least closer to the actual cost of the student. Anyone who's had a child with significant disabilities knows that it's not an 8.5 to 1 ratio. A lot of times we're looking at 1 to 1. The state already puts in what we call a high cost fund. Those are those students that need kind of full-time care and or are in that $50,000 to $100,000 range. We actually fund that separately, but this would be getting closer to the needs of the student. English learners, that is, I think, one where, and you'll see this in the Vanderbilt poll, a widespread in terms of how people feel about this. What I will say candidly, it is one of our fastest growing student populations in the state. Our districts are having a very difficult time supporting students because they don't have enough of a proportion to generate resources. But we are hearing a lot about the struggles there, and then certainly students able to getting to English proficiency as quickly as possible. And so this is something we're hearing a lot about. New to country, no formal education for long periods of time, separate from a child who's learning English, whose parents might have been here, et cetera. So this is one that I think we will welcome feedback on, but want to acknowledge that it is one of our fastest growing populations. And it was for Georgia, Alabama, and the states south of us. And now we're just seeing more of that population here. Rural is another population. We don't currently consider that in the BEP. So there would be a weight for rural students. There's also a separate conversation for sparsity. Hickman County is the one I use. Campbell County is very small and sometimes rural, sometimes not, depending on the federal government's definition. But Campbell County doesn't have the same needs as a rural because they're not sparse. Hickman is one of our largest geographic counties, but only has 3,000 students. So their transportation costs are very different per child. So we have heard a lot on sparsity. Fast growing is one, especially when you think about the collar counties around Nashville, Williamson in particular, Sumner, and then Rutherford are three of our fastest growing, along with Clarksville, Montgomery. So wanting to make sure that we actually account for that. And then charter enrollment, you all typically fund outside of the BEP. This would then bring that same facilities funding, but it would just be part of the formula. We are starting to hear, and that's at the bottom. We haven't to date, but we're starting to get much more on gifted. Just saw 3 emails come in right before this call on gifted, dyslexia, small LEA, and then K through 2. So really that early elementary literacy component, smaller class sizes, that potentially could be a weight. I do want to flag that every time you add a weight, it is one more component to the formula. It is also an additional expense. And so part of the feedback that we're going to be hoping to get over the next 6 weeks is, which of these do you want to prioritize the most? How do you want to think about that? And how might those weights look based on the needs of these groups? And a good example might be, do we care more as a state or want to fund more smaller class sizes in K through 2 and make sure that's a weight that allows for every, K through 2 class to be 15 students instead of 20? Or is it more important that we ensure that there are gifted programs for gifted and dyslexic students across the state? We're not, it's one of those, we read this in kindergarten. I don't know if kindergartners read this anymore, but I do with my kids. It's a book called Why Can't I Have Everything? This is the weights conversation is part of that. This isn't about funding everything. We are not going to be able to do that based on what I see in the recurring funding, but we need to prioritize what makes the most sense for Tennessee right now. You all do that. That is something I'm going to give you the information for direction and feedback. So I'm going to pause there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Commissioner, would you repeat one more time the charter enrollment? Make sure I understood what you said.
Sure. So what we have right now, and last year, I believe it was some recurring, some one time for charter school facilities. What this would be is, instead of having that outside of the BEP, let's say it's the $18 million total, that actually goes into the formula, and it's generated, this charter school student enrollment generates a certain dollar amount, as opposed to how we do it now, which is a bunch of grants, it's e-plan, it's time consuming. All of that now can just be in the formula instead of having to do grant programs outside of it. So it'd be the same facility funding. Questions, comments, clarifications, feedback, or direction, anything that doesn't resonate or particularly does, or direction for us about how you'd like us to help navigate the conversation as we get feedback. Or if it looks good, I'm happy with that too. Right, I'm going to keep going. If things come up, just go ahead and jump on in. The additional dollars is next. These are the things we've heard the most. I will say the old social studies teacher in me, economics teacher in particular, loved that financial literacy has come up at 3 of our town halls. So we added that in. I just think that's fantastic. And based on what we are seeing from our high school graduates, very much needed. Middle school CTE, I mentioned that on a panel that Chairman White and I were on today, but lots of focus on not waiting till high school, but providing more opportunities for students to look at different programs, get a little bit of experience so they can make informed decisions. Lots of interest in innovative high school models. Both of those bullets match the federal Perkins funding. They've changed that to allow for middle and high school and innovation to occur for Perkins, which is more of the CTE path and pathway work. There is some interest in expanding that across the state and maintaining it. Extended school year, you all do anyway. We don't talk about it as an extended school year, but it is the summer programming. I think we saw, and you all know, you funded and supported and led on the largest summer program in the country last year proportionally. We had about 21% of our 1st through 8th graders or 21% of our elementary school students who participated. That's a dollar amount that gets allocated to the child. So we already do extended school year. There is interest potentially in having that be bigger. I wasn't expecting that either, but there was some feedback there. RTI, you all have heard this for a long time. It's a requirement. They call it an unfunded mandate. It's kind of something else, but it is something where there's been a lot of feedback on having an RTI specialist at every school to implement the statute. And then the last is high dosage tutoring. As you all know, the learning loss and student acceleration bill, we will have the 3rd grade, that retention component of the bill will go into effect a year from now. We want to make sure that students who are required to then have tutoring, that is something that people have been asking about. Is there a support for that 4th grade tutoring? So these are the big things we've heard, but would happy to hear if you have other feedback, thoughts. Again, this is a great example of, coordinated school health or VPK. These would all be additional dollars that would be at a per student amount that would get allocated, but happy to get additional direction. Can't tell if, is that you, Speaker Hale? I can't tell it.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Got extended school year. Has there been any conversation about extended school day?
Yeah, a little bit. It's been interesting. That's been hit and miss with different school systems. I'm hearing that a little bit more in the elementary and middle school space, less in the high school because of sports and band and extracurriculars. But we have heard more about elementary school not having enough time. Is there a way to add a certain block of time? I will say more on the more days versus the longer days. We've heard a little bit more about that. I think some of that has to do with, frankly, just brains and fatigue and all of that, but more on the extended school year than the day so far.
Okay, follow up to that.
Yes, sir.
So this extended school year is the number of days in comparison to a 6 weeks as we're doing now. Is that correct?
That's right. I think, and what we're hearing a little bit is there were a lot of folks who just didn't participate in the summer programming or who are thinking, okay, that was just for this year or next year. What happens after that? And right now in legislation, it continues for 4th through 8th grade, not for 1st through 3rd. And there's a lot of, I think, our elementary school families who had a really great experience in the summer want to be able to have that continuity and are trying to figure out, is that this 6-week summer programming, or is it, instead of having 180 days, we're saying it needs to be 190, or most of our districts do it 175, but adding a certain number of days. So that's part of the conversation. It is more targeted to our 1st through 3rd grade families. I think a lot of elementary school folks just feel like their kids need more time and are interested in having a longer school year. Now, I'm not hearing that as much from our district folks, but our families are certainly saying that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, and to get to Chairman White's question on outcomes, lots of interesting thoughts and feedback on this. I think one of the things that we have seen, and I will use Florida as an example because they've had an outcomes component to their formula for the longest period of time, I think, of any state. One example is on this early post-secondary opportunities. And so what Florida did, gosh, just about 10 years ago, and we can have one of their experts come and talk to you all about how they thought about it and what they might do differently, but they essentially gave an additional dollar amount for every student that completed a certain number of post-secondary opportunities, statewide dual credit, dual enrollment, passing an AP class, whatever that might be. And they significantly increased the number of completers of some of those programs or courses over their first 5 years. I think they went from a couple of hundred to, I think they said something like 100,000 or something, just astronomical, because districts understood. And again, a lot of times we all love children, but the things that often change behavior the fastest are accountability or funding. So when districts understood, I will get more funding to ensure that I can actually fund a program that leads to an EPSO, an AP course passing, or industry cert, something like that. I will invest money in that because I know if the more students who pass, the more funding I will get to support that program. So Florida saw a massive increase as a result of that. Texas just started theirs. They do something a little bit more like what you see on the bottom. They have it tied more to proficiency on test scores. There's some challenges there, and they tie that again back to teacher salary. So teachers who see higher growth with individual students and collections of students can make significantly more money. I think the top for teachers who perform really well at kind of an exceptional level for multiple years can make somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000 to $100,000. So that was the Texas model. What we are hearing more in Tennessee, outside of Florida and Texas, and I think there's a couple states who do it a little different, is EPSOs, so focusing more on the high school space. Those students who complete and pass their EPSOs, passing an AP course, and now they have more equal opportunity to participate with AP Access for All, completing and earning their industry certification, and then completing a work-based learning or apprenticeship opportunity. lots of interest in that because people understand the need to have post-secondary readiness. West Tennessee, of course, is very interested in that. But there's been quite a bit of push on, if we're going to have a formula that allows us to do that, how do we do the same for middle school and elementary school? Would love to get any direction or feedback if you all are interested in us pushing and exploring that more. But that has been something we've heard a lot, that we want to make sure, especially with the focus on early literacy, that we are thinking about outcomes in that space and how do we measure that. Middle school, we can do a little bit more on readiness, ninth grade readiness, and metrics there if people are interested. But I think the other policy consideration I'd love feedback on is whether we limit that to just high need groups, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged English learners, or if this is any student, no matter where, because we have a pretty big jump we need to make for all kids regardless. So is it just a limited group we would want to do outcomes for, or is this something that every district would have equal chance for all students to take advantage of? So those are that question, and then kind of how you're thinking about this in general is helpful feedback for us. And I know it's a lot. Well, as you have feedback, feel free to send it our way. We are focusing more on the first 4 bullets, and then hopefully we will be able to have some very clear examples and options for middle school and elementary school, if that is some place that the legislature was interested in pursuing. The only other thing that I would say on this particular topic is whether or not you would want to see that at the district or school level, or whether this would be something that teachers would earn as part of a differentiated or competitive salary schedule. Like I said, Florida takes more of the district earns additional dollars for programs based on outcomes. Texas took a stance that was more about the individual teacher has earned additional compensation for getting strong performance. Those are 2 options. There's lots of other options, but that would be a policy consideration that I think would be important for all of us to really get some direction on.
Commissioner, this is Senator Watson. I was here doing a soliloquy only to realize that I was on mute, and Leader Hale didn't hear the beautiful flowing language that I was throwing out. So for me, when we acknowledge that roughly 65 to 70% of our students are not reading at grade level, and for me, who believes that the fundamental job that the education system has is to teach someone to read, because they can teach themselves a lot of other things if they can read. The reading proficiency, however that's measured, in my view, needs to be at the top of the list. If a person leaves our school system with the inability to read and read with comprehension, then all the job training in the world, all the other things that we might be doing are going to be less, if not ineffective. And so reading proficiency needs to be, in my mind, the top shelf, and as my father would say, keep the main thing is the main thing.
I love that. Thank you. No surprise. I love that, but very good. So we talked about local contribution, and I want to open it up to just broader questions. And you have this deck, but this is just this is more just for your information purposes, so that you know what's happening in local communities. But we're having 8 town halls and meetings over the next 4 business days, talking through local contributions, fiscal capacity, and maintenance of effort, and all of those conversations. Here is the feedback that we've received to date. Step 1 would be, let's talk about the state formula, state contribution. That would be potentially something that may be introduced. You all, of course, make that decision this year. And then we would take 12 months to say, now that locals know what the state will be contributing, we can have a year-long process to really talk about the local contribution and maintenance of effort requirements that we would consider the following year. It is really hard for locals to know what their feedback is until they actually see what a new formula looks like and how much money is in that formula. Because based on that, they might say, look, we don't want to do a 70-30 or 50-50 match. We actually want to do wealth, or we want to do property tax, or we want to do whatever this might look like. So this is where our proposal is at this time based on feedback. We would say whatever locals currently would have put into the BEP, that is what they will be required to do over the next 5 years. And that includes a calculation every year. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it's flat. And then starting, if it was considered for next year, having a local match conversation and legislation that would then tie back to the new formula, and giving locals 4 years to ramp up if they were at a place where they needed to. Most of our districts, I think it's a dozen, outside of those dozen, most already fund well above what those requirements are. So it's unlikely there's going to be a big change. We have a few that just do exactly what the minimum maintenance of effort requirements are. So this allows more time, and it also ensures that there are no impacts to local taxes driven by the state. Now, locals, of course, make their own decisions on that, but there's no increase to taxes, at least for the next 5 years. And again, that would be a longer conversation about whether or not that would ever happen. But they need the information on the state component before they can actually make a determination on that kind of a formula conversation. I think I saw a phone friend jump in, but any questions or comments on that?
Commissioner, this is Patsy, and to go back a bit, I couldn't unmute quickly enough, but I really am interested in the outcomes portion and measuring and accountability.
Yep.
We are put so much money into education. We continue to do that. We're going to be doing even more. We already are with ESSER and all the other things. And I just want to make sure that we are looking, that we have good measurements. I'm really interested in the program that would pay teachers for great jobs. I'm not quite sure how you fairly measure that. I can see a whole lot of angst about how one teacher would feel, their classroom is more challenging, yada, yada, yada. But whatever we can do on that accountability piece, that's where I really want to focus for myself. I want to just make sure that we are requiring that of the state and of our local districts as well.
I very much appreciate that. And what I put as one of our takeaways is before our next call, sending you all out a more of a deep dive of like, here are what other states have done as options. Here's what our recommendations could be for where we are in Tennessee, and really spending more time on the outcomes reporting, transparency, and return on investment part of the conversation. So I really appreciate that. I also feel pretty strongly about that. It's my tax dollars and my kids in public school right now. So I on both bookends. So we'll absolutely do that. And thank you very much. Okay. So this is, we are just from a next steps perspective, we just finished meeting 3. We'll all meet, a meeting with the attorneys for, all the lawyers in all the spaces. And then also continuing to meet with the public. Public comment will end essentially the week of January 10th. Because we need several weeks for the steering committee to have their last meeting and then kind of summarize that decision made, certainly between all of you, the governor's office, et cetera, about whether or not we are moving forward with anything this session. But want to just kind of flag, we're going to be doing a big push for final rounds of public comment that week of January 10th. We will have at least a framework around this is what the formula could look like. It will not have a dollar amount. And I know that's going to be very difficult for lots of folks in the general public. That is not a decision, nor is that a recommendation that comes from this department. Obviously, you all are the ones who make decisions about funding. Governor's office will certainly, they have the recurring budget, and they will likely, if we move forward with anything, have a recommendation that you all consider, of course, and decide yes or no on. But what we would say is here is a framework, and then we'll have some time to talk through kind of what to do from there. But we want to have the general public know, look, this is what we've heard, resonate, doesn't resonate. That round of comment will come in January 10th, and then we'll be able to kind of move from there. As we've kind of talked about, this should not be, we talk about the BEP being complicated, no one understands it. And I've heard that for a very, very long time, even before I moved to Tennessee. I think this is an opportunity where this should be really clean. It should be something that it's like the elevator pitch going from floor 1 to floor 20. You should be able to explain our state funding formula. So many dollars of our taxpayer dollars go to education. I want to make sure that a parent, you all, my department, a school, a teacher, whoever it is able to say, look, this is what we fund in Tennessee, and here's why we fund it that way. It should be that clean. And so what I would say is that you aren't going to see a 100 or 300 page proposal. This is going to be something tight, clean, and really focused on accountability and transparency, and making sure that the dollars are invested in ways that are going to provide the biggest leverage for moving student achievement. This is about kids learning in school, and what it will take to make sure all kids learn. So that's where we're at. And really appreciate the feedback and requests. We've got a lot of takeaways and content we're going to send back to you, but want to open it up to any additional questions, feedback, direction, requirements, anything that you have for us. We want to make sure we're meeting your expectations on anything you might need.
One question, let me
Yes, sir.
repeat what I think I heard you say, was that there may or may not be legislation this session coming forward on this. Is that what you said?
It is. I don't make that decision, of course. And so I never want to be out in front of the elected officials who make that. So I think that will be a conversation that the governor's office will have with you all, or the governor will have with you all. And then a decision will be made, I think, closer to January about whether it's a go or a no go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
One more comment from me, Commissioner. I
Yes.
do like the wisdom in the local funding that is taken out. The local funding will continue to be what it has been, that way there's no confusion, and while we determine what the state's best direction and what the state can do. And that way if we're going to have hope of doing anything this session, taking the local funding out is critical. Things will continue as they are now for local.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Other feedback, direction, things you want to see out of us, or resources we can get to you. You all know that I am a just innately happy and optimistic person. So that is how I'm operating in this conversation. I'm operating with a lot of hope that we can get to a formula that is easy to understand and accountable, and also gives districts what they need to get the job done, and that we're holding them accountable on the back end. So we are willing to do whatever it takes to get you a proposal that you feel confident in discussing and considering during legislative session. So y'all have my cell phone and my email if you want to talk outside of this space and just make sure that we can get you the resources or experts you need. We're happy to do that as well.
One more thing. Do we have a copy of this PowerPoint you just presented to us?
Yes, sir. Yes, we'll make sure that we'll send that over with the package.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner, this is Senator Watts again. This is a fairly aggressive timeline that you've put on this. I would just say it's a heavy lift to begin with. And as a former member of the Senate used to say, sometimes if you move a little slower, you get there faster. I mean, we need to get this right. And so while I like the idea of being aggressive and having an aggressive timeline, I think the members of the steering committee should be cognizant of the fact that we may not have everything we need or want, or have the structure that we want in the time frame that you've given us, and that should not hinder our discussion about it.
Agreed.
Because you've got 16 subgroups working, and you've got ambassadors out there, and then you're going to have people like me out there talking about it, and others. And I mean, that's just a lot for this steering committee to process in a short amount of time.
Yes, sir. That's right. And that's why I'm hoping that the subcommittees will sort through all sorts of comments and summarize that up for folks. But appreciate that. And yes, we are trying to do a robust set of engagement. I think that to your point, it is important that part of the process is right. And we will see where we're at, 6 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now, and whether or not you all feel confident or comfortable moving forward, or you want to take a different path. But hear that and appreciate that. Absolutely. All right. Well, you all know how to reach me. We'll get you some things shortly. Appreciate the time that you're taking being on this call. We'll talk soon. And I just want to say personally, I hope you all have a Merry Christmas. It's going to be, I know we are going to have we're going to rock and roll when we come back January to April or May. We are ready to engage and excited to see what's to come. But have a really nice, genuinely a really nice holiday with your family. You've all earned it. It's been a busy year, but very appreciative from the department and certainly from school districts. I'm just very grateful that you all continue to support public ed and where we're trying to get to. But we've got a lot of work to do for our kids, more now than we did a year and a half ago. So we are ready. We're moving fast, but it is, you know me, there's nothing more important than our little ones. So I'm just very grateful that you're taking the time. Thank you. All right. Bye, y'all.